He didn't even raise his voice at first, just stared across the conference table, lips curling like he'd been waiting for this moment all morning. Apologize to my son, or you're done here. The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through the fluorescent hum. I looked around. 15 people from finance, 3 from audit, 2 interns. Every one of them froze. You could practically hear the coffee cups stop midair. His son Nathan sat to his right. Fresh out of grad school, perfect hair, confidence of someone who'd never once been told no. He smirked, tapping a pen against the report I'd spent 2 weeks cleaning up after his errors. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that silence has a weight of its own. The CFO, Richard Holt, leaned forward. Well? I met his eyes. For what exactly? He turned red, the kind of red that comes from ego, not anger. For disrespecting Nathan during yesterday's review. For undermining him in front of his team, I smiled, slow and steady. You mean when I pointed out that your son's streamlined forecast forgot to include payroll tax obligations for Q3? The room stayed silent, but I caught the small flicker in a junior analyst's eyes. The kind that says, please stop talking before this gets worse. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You think you're untouchable because you've been here 12 years. But this department runs on respect, Anna, and you just lost yours. Nathan finally spoke. Maybe next time, keep your comments to yourself. Some of us are trying to modernize this place. Modernize. I echoed softly. That's what you call deleting half of the compliance formulas? He shrugged. Too complicated. People like simplicity. People like lies, I thought. But I said nothing. Richard leaned back, pretending composure. You have until 5 to apologize, or you can clean out your desk. And that was it. The public verdict. In front of the entire floor. No warning, no chance to explain, just an order to bow to nepotism or leave. I gathered my notes quietly, nodded once, and said, understood. He mistook that for surrender. They always do. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. Instead, I reread my employment contract, line by line like a bedtime story. 12 years of loyalty condensed into 22 pages of clauses and fine print. And then, on page 19, subsection D. In the event of termination without cause, employee retains full rights to all internally developed compliance software and frameworks authored independently. I almost laughed. They'd never noticed it. Back when I first joined, I'd been a contractor, hired to stabilize the company's internal audit automation. When they converted me to full-time, they reused the same contract template and never deleted that clause. 12 years later, it still stood. By morning, my decision was already made. The office was buzzing with whispered pity when I walked in. People glanced up, then quickly looked away, pretending to check emails. Nathan was already in the break room, bragging about how he'd handled the compliance dinosaur. I passed him without a word. At 9:03 a.m., Richard appeared in my doorway. He looked smug, rested. Hope you learned your lesson, he said. I smiled. I did. I handed him the printed resignation letter. Crisp, folded once. He barely glanced at it before smirking. Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before embarrassing my son. He turned to leave, but the door hadn't even shut when a voice shouted down the hall. Sir, you did what? It was Marianne, the company's legal counsel. Her heels clattered like gunfire as she rushed in, waving a folder. Please tell me you didn't just accept Anna's resignation. Richard blinked. She quit. What's the problem? Marianne's eyes darted between us. Oh my God, she whispered. You just voided the proprietary software rights. All of our audit automation tools, her frameworks, those belong to her now. The room went so still I could hear the air conditioning click. Richard's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Everything she built is company property. I raised an eyebrow. Not according to Section 12D. He froze. I could see him replaying every moment, Every word from yesterday, every smirk. Realization was starting to crawl up his spine like cold water. Marianne flipped open the folder, tapping the highlighted section. She's right. It's still active. You never amended her contract. She owns the compliance architecture. Richard stared at me, pale now. You're bluffing. I leaned back in my chair. Then feel free to delete it. Let's see how long the system lasts. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or slam doors. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a smile, a clause no one ever read, and the kind of calm that makes people nervous. As Marianne kept talking, I picked up my coffee. The same cheap break room brew I'd sipped through layoffs, mergers, and budget cuts, and took one slow drink. The taste hadn't changed in 12 years, but everything else had. That morning, I walked out of that building for the last time. No tears, no speech, just silence. And a system that was about to remind them exactly who built its bones. They thought I was leaving. I was only getting started. When you leave a company after 12 years, people expect some kind of goodbye. A cake, a speech, maybe a tear or two in the parking lot. I gave them nothing. Just silence and a half smile that lingered longer than it should have. That night, I cleaned my home office. 12 years of files, backups, and audit notes neatly archived on an external drive I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was protecting what was mine. The compliance framework I'd built, Sentinel, wasn't just a program. It was a living system. Automated risk mapping, audit trails, and cross-checks that had saved the company from 3 separate fines. Every log still ran through a license I owned. When they made me apologize to their prodigy, they didn't just insult me. They fired their firewall. By Monday, my inbox was flooded. Not from the company. Those accounts had been deactivated. But from old colleagues using personal emails. Anna, something's off. The audit console is blank. Can you check the validation tool? It's crashing. I didn't respond. They'd figure it out eventually. At 10:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened. Anna, it's Marianne. Please call me back. Urgent. Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was scared. By noon, the rumors had reached me through LinkedIn messages and quiet text threads. The quarterly compliance sync had failed mid-meeting. Nathan's fancy, streamlined dashboard was displaying red error codes instead of financial metrics. The CFO had apparently lost his composure in front of the board. A few analysts messaged me privately. Did you do something? I didn't answer, because the truth was I hadn't done anything. Yet. See, Sentinel wasn't vindictive. It was obedient. It was built to follow one simple rule. Maintain operational integrity unless license ownership changes. When Richard accepted my resignation without legal transfer, the system automatically entered restricted mode. That meant read-only access, no updates, no exports, no external syncing. In plain English, frozen. It wasn't revenge. It was protocol. Around 2 p.m., Marianne called again. I picked up this time. Anna, we need to talk, she said quickly. The system locked everyone out. The license is reading owner authorization required. It says your credentials are still listed as primary. I sipped my tea. That's correct. She exhaled. Can we meet? Maybe we can negotiate a handover? I'm not unreasonable, I said softly. But I'm not a fool either. You and I both know that framework is my intellectual property. I understand, she said carefully. But the CFO, he's saying you intentionally sabotaged? I cut her off. Marianne, don't finish that sentence. You know exactly how Sentinel works. It followed its license clause. They triggered it themselves. She hesitated. Can you at least help us restore read access? The audit committee is panicking. There's a board review tomorrow. Send me the request in writing, I said. There was a long pause before she replied. You really built a fortress, didn't you? No, I said. I built accountability. That evening, I went for a walk near the river, trying to clear my head. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt still. When people think of revenge, they picture chaos. Lawsuits, screaming matches, shattered glass. Mine was quieter. It lived in the fine print no one read, in the lines of code they dismissed as legacy junk. Around 8, my phone buzzed again. A message from one of my former interns, Leah. They're saying the board called an emergency session. Nathan can't recover the audit reports. Richard's blaming IT. People are terrified. I typed one word back. Expected. By morning, things had escalated. The company's quarterly investor presentation was due in 3 hours. The financial data, every number tied to risk and compliance, was locked. I didn't need to be in the building to imagine the panic. The same interns who once fetched coffee were now fielding calls from executives who suddenly couldn't open files. At 9:07 a.m., Marianne called again. Anna, please. The CFO is, well, he's not doing well. The board wants to resolve this. They're asking what it would take to reinstate the license. What it would take, I repeated slowly, is an apology. The same one I was denied. You want Richard to apologize? I want accountability, I said. And I want my consulting rights reinstated under Raven Analytics, LLC. I own it. It's the original contracting entity before I was internalized. Otherwise, Sentinel stays asleep. She didn't argue. I could hear typing in the background. I'll relay that, she said finally. An hour later, social media started whispering. The company's investor call had been postponed due to technical challenges. Stock dipped 4% before lunch. And then, at 2:16 p.m., my phone lit up again. Private number. Anna. Richard's voice cracked through the line. Let's talk. Of course, I said. Just remember, you're the one who wanted a public lesson. He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him swallow his pride through the static. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. We'll fix this. Just tell me what you need. I smiled. Good. Because this isn't about breaking your company. It's about reminding it who built the walls that keep it standing. And for the first time since he'd humiliated me, he said the words I never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry. But I wasn't done yet. Because apologies without change, they're just noise. And I'd spent too many years listening to men like him make noise. The apology came on a Wednesday morning, 30 hours after the company's investor meeting collapsed into silence. Richard called me from his office, his voice steadier than before. Anna, we've reviewed your contract. Legal confirmed the clause. I may have spoken out of turn. May have? I repeated. He sighed. I'm sorry, all right? Let's just fix this. There it was, the apology. Not because he meant it, but because he had no choice. I'm not against fixing things, I said, but I won't just hand Sentinel back for free. I built that system. It's my work. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I want recognition, consulting rights, and a clean exit package, retroactive to the date of my resignation. There was a pause. You're holding us hostage, Anna. I almost laughed. No, Richard. I'm holding you accountable. By the next morning, Marianne reached out to schedule a formal discussion. Off the record, she said. The board is furious. They want this resolved quietly before it reaches investors. You still have the only license key I agreed to meet in person. Neutral ground. A cafe halfway between downtown and the industrial park where the company's office sat like a gray box of glass and ego. When I arrived, Marianne was already there. Laptop open, legal documents scattered across the table. She looked tired, worn thin. I'm not here to fight, she started. But you have to understand what you're doing, locking an entire compliance system, has consequences. What I did, I said calmly, was follow procedure. The license reverted to me because of Richard's decision. The system isn't locked out of spite. It's locked because the terms changed. She rubbed her forehead. The board won't see it that way. The board can read, I said. Clause 12D has been there since day one. Marianne stared at me for a long moment. Do you know why they're really panicking? I shook my head. Because the SEC is requesting an audit review from your system. They can't generate it without your credentials. If we miss that deadline... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I leaned back. Then it seems we both have incentive to resolve this quickly. She nodded, typing something into her laptop. Here's the proposal. You'll be rehired as a consultant under Raven Analytics LLC, independent status, full control of your framework, compensation, triple your previous salary, retroactive benefits included. In return, you'll restore system access and provide operational continuity. I read the offer slowly. It was more than I expected. Too generous, almost. What's the catch? I asked. Marianne smiled thinly. No catch. Just a confidentiality clause. They don't want the story getting out. I closed the laptop. Tell them to remove that line. I'm not interested in silence anymore. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from old coworkers. Word had spread. They all wanted to know if it was true, that I'd negotiated my way back, that the CFO had been forced to bend. I didn't answer anyone. Not yet. Instead, I sat at my desk, sipping coffee gone cold, staring at the dormant code window on my screen. Sentinel's interface glowed faintly in standby mode. Its heartbeat, a pulsing blue light, still waiting. I'd spent years building that system, line by line, from hotel rooms and late-night audits, through every merger and rebrand. It wasn't just data. It was memory. My memory. And now they wanted it back, pretending they suddenly cared about collaboration. I reopened the contract draft and added one final clause of my own. Raven Analytics reserves full rights to system updates, derivative frameworks, and adaptive integrations created after reinstatement. Any breach of contract or interference with proprietary code will result in immediate license termination without notice. They wanted my system? Fine. But I was making sure they could never erase me again. The next morning, Marianne called to confirm they accepted. Everything's signed. They've wired your consulting fee. You'll receive system access requests from IT within the hour. I thanked her, though I could hear the tension still in her voice. Richard isn't happy, she said quietly. He feels humiliated. He should, I replied. He forgot who built the walls he stands in. When I logged into Sentinel again, it felt like opening a vault that had been sealed for years. Everything was there. Logs, audit trails, compliance maps, all intact. I could have restored full functionality instantly, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd taken for granted. So, I initiated a gradual reactivation. System by system, server by server, each required my manual authorization. It would take days, maybe a week. Just long enough for them to think about what respect really costs. At 11:04 a.m., a Slack message popped up. Nathan. Hey, Anna. Guess we're working together again. No hard feelings, right? I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, hard feelings fade. Consequences don't, he didn't reply. That evening, Marianne called one last time. The board signed the final agreement. You're officially reinstated as a consultant. Congratulations. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Because sometimes justice isn't about revenge or money. It's about correction, about balance, about making sure the people who thought you were disposable finally understand that competence has a backbone. Before I shut my laptop, I opened Sentinel's admin console one last time. The system hummed to life, every line of code like an old friend waking up. At the bottom of the dashboard, a new message appeared automatically, something I'd programmed years ago for moments like this. Integrity is not what you preach. It's what remains when power fades. I smiled. For once, the system and I were perfectly aligned. When I walked back into the office a week later, the building looked exactly the same. Glass walls, gray carpets, that same faint smell of burnt coffee and old toner. But something had shifted. Conversation stopped when I passed. Eyes followed me like I was a ghost returning to claim unfinished business. I wasn't there as an employee anymore. My badge now read consultant, and everyone knew what that meant. Untouchable. Richard didn't greet me. He didn't even look at me when I entered the meeting room. Nathan sat across the table, pretending to check his phone, but the tremor in his hand gave him away. Marianne began briskly, voice steady but careful. We've restored all primary systems. Anna has agreed to assist with a full audit reconciliation before the external review next month. I nodded once. That's correct. I'll be overseeing integrity checks on Sentinel's restored modules. All access changes will go through me. Richard finally looked up. We just need you to make sure it's stable, he said coldly. No surprises. I smiled. Stability depends on how much you've changed since I left. He didn't respond. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Most of the staff avoided direct eye contact. The same people who once laughed with Nathan at my expense now sent overly polite emails filled with thank you and appreciate your help. Guilt has a way of softening even the sharpest tongues. Still, I kept my head down and worked. Every night I stayed late, reviewing logs and comparing old entries against the new data. That's when I started noticing something strange. Hidden among the audit records were unexplained edits, manual overrides entered during the months I was gone. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Transactions flagged as vendor discrepancies had been reclassified as approved exceptions. Dozens of them. At first, I thought it was sloppiness. But when I cross-checked the vendor IDs, they all traced back to one of Nathan's new efficiency initiatives. I opened the change history. Every single override had been done under his admin credentials. I sat back in my chair, pulse slowing. This wasn't incompetence. It was manipulation. The next morning, I walked into Marianne's office. She looked exhausted, surrounded by folders and coffee cups. Do you have a minute? I asked. She gestured to the chair. Always. What's going on? I slid a printed report across her desk. I found these in the audit logs. Unauthorized modifications, all tied to Nathan Holt. She frowned, scanning the pages. Are you sure these weren't system errors from the license transfer? I'm sure, I said. These are manual entries. Look at the timestamps, each done after 11 p.m. That's not batch automation. That's human. Her expression changed. If these are what I think they are, the SEC could see this as data tampering. Exactly, I said quietly. And Richard has no idea. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Anna, this could destroy them. I didn't answer. She already knew where my thoughts were going. That afternoon, I was scheduled for a status update meeting with Richard and Nathan. The room felt colder than usual, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Richard started stiffly. How's the system performing? Flawlessly, I said. But there's something you should see. I turned my laptop toward them, displaying the audit trail on the screen. A neat timeline of every manual edit, every reclassification, each bearing Nathan's digital signature. Nathan's smirk disappeared. That's not what it looks like. Richard blinked. Nathan, what is this? Probably test data, he stammered. You know how these systems can glitch. Glitches don't log user IDs, I said calmly. These were intentional. Richard's face went pale. You're saying my son falsified audit data? I'm saying your son altered regulated financial records, I replied. And the timestamps prove it. Nathan stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're just trying to get back at me. I didn't raise my voice. I don't need revenge, Nathan. I have proof, he stormed out. muttering something under his breath. But Richard stayed seated, staring at the screen. His jaw tightened, his fingers trembling slightly on the table. Finally, he whispered, "How bad is it?" "Bad," I said. "Enough to trigger an investigation if anyone outside finds out." He closed his eyes. "Can you fix it?" "Not without leaving a trace," I replied. "And not without breaking the law myself." Richard looked up, defeated. "Then what do we do?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You do what you should have done from the beginning. Tell the truth. And let me clean it up properly." He stared at me for a long time. Then, quietly, he nodded. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone else left. The building hummed with low fluorescent light, the kind of silence that feels alive. I opened Sentinel one last time, locking Nathan's credentials and preserving the logs in a separate encrypted archive. Not to destroy him, but to protect myself. When I finally shut down my computer, it was past midnight. My reflection in the dark screen looked tired but certain. I wasn't the same woman who'd been ordered to apologize. I was the one they now relied on to save them. And maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all. Watching the people who once dismissed you realize that the foundation they tried to bury you under was the very ground keeping them from collapsing. By Monday morning, the whispers had spread beyond the office. Something about data irregularities, late-night edits, vendor concerns. No one said Nathan's name out loud, but everyone knew. Corporate gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a nervous smile. "Morning, Ms. Keller. Mr. Holt is in early." Of course he was. Panic wakes people up better than coffee. Richard was already in the boardroom, pacing. The lines around his eyes looked deeper, the arrogance gone. On the table lay a printed report, my audit report, open to the page that exposed Nathan's edits. Marianne sat quietly beside him, legal pad in hand. "Anna," Richard began, voice rough. "Close the door, please." I did. He sank into his chair, exhaling. "The board knows." "Someone leaked the audit summary." "Leaked?" I asked carefully. "From where?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. What matters is the damage. The SEC wants clarification. I'm meeting with them tomorrow." Marianne glanced up. "They're not threatening sanctions yet, but they're watching closely. If they find intent—" "They will," I interrupted softly. "The logs don't lie." Richard rubbed his face with both hands. "Nathan swears it was an oversight." I leaned forward. "Oversight doesn't explain deliberate overrides." His voice cracked. "He's my son, Anna." I nodded. "And this is your company. You'll have to choose which one you're willing to lose." Silence filled the room. That afternoon, Nathan showed up at my office door, pale and defiant. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't look up from my screen. "There's nothing to win. I'm just doing my job." "You could have deleted those logs," he snapped. "You didn't have to show them." I finally met his eyes. "You're right. I didn't have to. But I also didn't have to cover your mistakes." He laughed bitterly. "You think my dad will choose you over me?" "I think," I said slowly, "he's realizing what happens when you build a legacy on shortcuts." For a moment, the confidence drained from his face, replaced by something almost human. Fear. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I didn't follow. The next day, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Marianne insisted I attend as technical advisor. When I entered, the tension was thick enough to taste. Richard sat at the head of the table. Nathan was beside him, eyes down. Across from them were 7 board members and a representative from the external audit firm. The chairwoman spoke first. "We've reviewed the preliminary findings. It's clear that unauthorized changes were made to financial audit data. Ms. Keller, can you confirm that these edits were performed using Mr. Nathan Holt's credentials?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Every entry is time-stamped, verified, and backed up across 3 independent logs. Nathan shifted in his seat. It was a trial process. We were testing a faster classification method. The chairwoman didn't blink. Testing without documentation, without authorization, and within a regulated system? Richard tried to interject, but she raised a hand. Mr. Holt, your leadership allowed this to occur. That's a failure of oversight. He went silent. I kept my tone neutral. I've already prepared a restoration plan to correct the discrepancies. It'll take 2 weeks, but it's recoverable. The chairwoman nodded. We appreciate your diligence, Ms. Keller. As for Mr. Nathan Holt, the board will deliberate on disciplinary action. Nathan's eyes darted to his father. Dad, say something. But Richard didn't. He just stared at the table, shoulders heavy. After the meeting, Marianne caught up with me in the hallway. You handled that well, she said quietly. They'll likely remove Nathan from his role. Richard may step down too. I didn't want this, I said. I know, she replied. But sometimes integrity looks like betrayal to the wrong people. Her words stayed with me. 2 weeks later, the system was stable again. Sentinel purred quietly, its metrics flawless. I'd completed the restoration ahead of schedule, delivered the report, and finalized my consulting payout. On my last day, Richard came to find me. He looked older, defeated, but his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I wanted to thank you, he said. You saved this company, even after what I did. I didn't save it, I said. I just stopped it from collapsing under its own lies. He nodded slowly. Nathan's resigned. The board's making it official next week. He's angry, but maybe it's what he needs. I didn't answer. Some lessons cost what they should. He cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The board wants to offer you the role of compliance director. Full authority. No more consultants above you. For a moment, I just looked at him. 12 years ago, I'd have said yes without hesitation. But now? I appreciate it, I said gently. But I've built enough foundations for other people. It's time I build something for myself. He nodded again, understanding more than he wanted to. Good luck, Anna. That evening, I walked out of the building for the second and last time. The sunset hit the glass panels, turning the office gold for a moment before fading back to gray. My phone buzzed. A message from Marianne. You did the right thing. Proud of you. I smiled faintly, then deleted it. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about peace. People like Richard and Nathan will keep rebuilding their towers, patching cracks they can't see. But I'd learned something they never would. Power doesn't come from titles or threats. It comes from knowing you can walk away. And the system still remembers your name. As I reached the street, I looked back once. The building stood quiet, humming with the same electricity I'd once kept alive. Then I turned and walked toward the city lights. Not as an employee, not as a victim, as the architect of my own ending. I knew I was being erased the moment they moved my desk. Not fired, not demoted. Just relocated to the back corner of the office next to the humming server rack that sounded like a dying refrigerator. It's funny how silence can be louder than words. No one said a thing, but everyone understood what it meant. I was no longer part of the conversation, only the paperwork. And that was fine by me. For a while, I had joined Ecliptech Systems when it was barely more than a handful of engineers and a shared dream built out of caffeine and unpaid hours. Back then, I was the one who made sure things actually worked. Filed the incorporation docs, cleaned up the early contracts, found the tax loopholes that saved us from collapsing in our first year. When prototypes failed and tempers flared, I was the one who stayed late rewriting the compliance reports so our investors didn't see the cracks. Mary's the glue, the founder used to say. She keeps the ship from sinking. Somewhere along the way, glue became invisible. When the new CEO came in, crisp suit, MBA grin, and buzzwords sharp enough to cut glass, everything changed. He didn't shake my hand on his first day, just nodded vaguely, already looking past me. "We'll streamline operations," he said. Translation, he wanted names, not work. And in a world obsessed with titles, I was a nobody. Still, I didn't complain. I've seen empires built on ego collapse faster than a bad soufflé. The secret to surviving in corporate jungles is simple. Never fight for credit. Fight for evidence. Paper trails don't forget. People do. So while the new leadership strutted through boardrooms pitching innovation decks I'd formatted, I stayed in my corner, doing what I did best. Documenting, reviewing, filing. Quietly. Meticulously. My name was on the fine print, not the headlines. Then one morning, during an all-hands meeting, I caught the CEO's words like a slap. "Mary just handles the paperwork," he said, chuckling. Brilliant with forms, though. Everyone needs one of those. Laughter rippled around the room. Polite, nervous laughter. The kind that fills space when no one wants to disagree with power. I smiled. Even clapped once. Because that's the trick, isn't it? You let them underestimate you. It's the only camouflage that never fails. What he didn't know, what none of them did, was that for the last 7 years, every time they'd filed a provisional patent, every time an engineer sketched an idea on a napkin, every time legal panicked over phrasing that might violate an NDA, it had gone through me. Every single one. Not because I demanded it. Because no one else could translate the chaos into something the US Patent Office would actually approve. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was the one who made the messy genius of others make sense to the system. I knew which designs were real and which were smoke. And when you touch that much intellectual property, some of it touches back. That night, I stayed late again. Everyone else had gone home. Their Slack statuses switched to offline, but I was still at my desk reading a draft of our upcoming acquisition deck. The CEO was planning to sell Ecliptech to a conglomerate, one of those faceless giants that eats smaller companies for breakfast. And in his glowing presentation slides, I saw the future laid out in glossy bullet points. Streamlined transition, unified leadership, core assets fully secured. Except one thing wasn't secured, because buried inside the due diligence appendix, in the hundreds of filings, patents, and authorizations they'd need to prove ownership, were 54 documents that carried my signature. Some as co-author, some as sole drafter. All legally binding, all verifiable. And not once had anyone ever asked me to sign a work-for-hire clause. I sat there, staring at the screen while the office lights flickered in the reflection of the glass wall. For years, they'd dismissed me as the paper pusher, the note-taker, the quiet one. But the truth was written right there, black ink on federal records. I was the architect behind half of what they were selling. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan anything at all. I just printed copies, one set for home, one for the lawyer I quietly kept on retainer, a habit from years of watching startups implode. The next morning, I went to work as usual, smiled at reception, brought donuts, pretended nothing had changed, because for now it hadn't. The acquisition meeting was still 2 weeks away, but time is a funny thing when you know a storm is coming. Every joke about the paperwork girl, every condescending smile, every time they forgot my name on the slide deck, it all started to sound different, louder, almost like an overture before the curtain rises. And as I filed another set of irrelevant compliance documents, I felt something shift. They thought I was invisible, but I knew better. I wasn't the glue anymore. I was the foundation. And they were about to learn what happens when the foundation stops holding the weight. Because in business, just like in life, what you dismiss as paperwork can turn out to be the deed. And honey, mine had 54 signatures. The acquisition countdown had begun. Emails buzzed through the office like caffeine-fed hornets. Due diligence data room access, patent summary request, ownership verification pending. It was all happening fast. Too fast. Everyone was walking taller, dressing sharper, talking louder. The interns started wearing blazers. Even the engineers shaved. You could smell ambition in the recycled air. The CEO was in his element, strutting from meeting to meeting with that permanent tan and TED Talk confidence. This acquisition, he said at the Monday briefing, will redefine Ecliptech's legacy. We're finally being recognized for our innovation. I stood at the back, clipboard in hand, taking notes like always. He didn't look at me once. Nobody did. That's the thing about being invisible. You see everything. After the meeting, I went back to my corner and checked the shared drive. The buyers, a conglomerate called Trionis Technologies, had already begun reviewing our intellectual property. Every file I'd ever touched was in that folder. Every draft, every revision, every filing number. And there it was, in plain sight. Inventor, Mary S. Leland, 54 times. I stared at my own name as if it belonged to someone else. Years of quiet, late-night work reduced to a line item. But those lines were starting to glow like fuse wires. Because I knew what Trionis would find. They'd see that the person who just handled paperwork had authored the very filings that determined Ecliptech's valuation. That afternoon, I overheard the CEO in the hallway talking to our CFO. "We'll make this clean," he said, his voice too casual. "The buyers don't need to know who drafted what. It's company property." The CFO hesitated. "But Mary's admin." The CEO cut in, his smile audible. "She doesn't own a thing." I smiled to myself. That word again. Admin. It's what men say when they don't know how to define competence that doesn't look like theirs. I stayed quiet, of course. Quiet is where power grows. Over the next few days, I became a ghost haunting my own legacy. I'd see my work in presentations, my phrasing in legal summaries, my language in investor decks, all stripped of my name. Maddening? Sure. But I'd learned long ago. Emotion clouds precision, and precision was my weapon. By Thursday, Trionis had started requesting clarifications. I saw the emails as they came in. Please confirm inventorship details for filings 2043 to 2057. Requesting original documentation of co-author acknowledgement. The CEO's assistant forwarded them straight to legal, tagging the CEO with, "Handled internally. No need to involve Mary." They were panicking. Quietly. You can always tell when a leader starts copying legal on every sentence. That evening, I got a message from an old friend, Dylan, one of the engineers from the early days. He'd been looped into the acquisition team as a technical consultant. "Hey, Mary, quick one. Trionis asked if you're still with the company." "Why?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Because they finally read the fine print." I didn't elaborate. On Friday morning, the CEO called a core team alignment session. Translation, damage control. I wasn't invited, naturally, but my access still worked. Years of setting up compliance systems had their perks. So while they were in the glass conference room upstairs, I opened the shared folder titled IP Due Diligence Response. Inside were edited drafts of the filings, mine, with my name replaced by corporate entity Ecliptech Systems. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the weight of it settle. They weren't just ignoring my work anymore. They were rewriting history. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I just began quietly restoring the truth. I opened my private archive, the one I'd built out of habit, and cross-referenced every altered document against the originals I'd printed and time-stamped years ago. Each carried a federal filing ID, an unchangeable digital record. You can Photoshop a name, but you can't rewrite a timestamp in the USPTO database. By the time the office emptied for the weekend, I'd built my own folder. 54 PDFs, perfectly ordered, annotated, undeniable. I renamed it Inheritance, because that's what it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every meeting, every time someone had taken credit for my work, every time I'd stayed late so someone else could present my findings the next morning. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I thought about what Dylan once said years ago, when we were debugging a prototype at 2 a.m. "Mary, you're the system." I'd laughed then, but now I understood. Without me, the company didn't run. It merely pretended to. Monday arrived with its usual fake cheer. The CEO strutted into the office with a fresh haircut and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "The acquisition board meets Wednesday." Let's make it seamless. That word stuck in my mind all day. Seamless meant no interruptions, no surprises. And yet, surprises were exactly what Trionis was about to find. Because while they thought I was the paperwork girl, I was also the paper trail. And in the world of billion-dollar acquisitions, the paper trail isn't background noise. It's the truth. And the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when it carries your name 54 times in black ink. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office felt heavier. You could almost taste the panic hiding under the smell of burnt coffee and ambition. The acquisition board from Trionis was scheduled to arrive the next day. Everyone was pretending to be calm, but the nervous energy crackled through the hallways like static. I watched from my desk as the CEO rehearsed his vision speech in the glass conference room, gesturing dramatically at slides that weren't his. He'd been talking for weeks about clean IP portfolios and streamlined ownership structures. Phrases that sounded good until someone actually checked them. And someone had. At 9:47 a.m., an email popped into my inbox. Forwarded by accident, as most good things are. The subject line read, "Urgent, Inventorship Verification Inquiry." The message was short. A Trionis legal associate was requesting direct confirmation from Ms. Leland regarding filings number 2028 to number 2082. It was polite, clinical, but I could feel the tremor between the lines. They'd seen my name. I knew what that meant. They were starting to question who really owned what they were buying. 10 minutes later, my office phone rang. An internal call from HR. "Hey, Mary," came the bright, artificial tone of Kara, our HR director. "The CEO would love to have a quick chat upstairs, just to align before the board meeting." I almost laughed. Align. That's what they call it when they're about to ask you to disappear quietly. When I stepped into the executive floor, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist didn't smile this time. The blinds were half closed, casting long shadows across the hallway. The CEO's assistant gave me a tight nod and gestured toward the small conference room. Inside were 3 people: the CEO, Kara from HR, and Tom from legal. The same trio you see in every story that ends with the word termination. "Mary," the CEO said smoothly, "thanks for coming up." He was smiling too hard. "We've had a little misunderstanding in the acquisition paperwork. Nothing serious, just some clerical mix-ups involving your name on old filings." "Mix-ups?" I asked, my voice calm. He nodded quickly. "Yes, apparently your name was listed as an inventor on some legacy patents. Total coincidence, of course. The buyers just need clarification that you were in an administrative role, not a contributing one." Tom slid a document toward me across the table. A single-page statement, already printed. My name at the top. At the bottom, a signature line. "This confirms that any inventorship or authorship listings naming Mary S. Leland were administrative in nature and do not imply ownership or intellectual contribution." I read it once, then again, slowly. Kara shifted uncomfortably. The CEO kept smiling. "Once you sign, this all goes away," he said. "We can't have delays, you understand. Trionis needs clarity before tomorrow's session. I set the paper down. You want me to disclaim the patents?" "It's just formality," he replied quickly. "You're not giving anything up." "It's symbolic," I smiled faintly. Funny thing about symbols. They tend to have meaning. His jaw tightened. "Mary, this isn't personal." "Of course it isn't," I said. "It's business." And in business, we verify everything I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. Their expressions changed immediately. Inside were the original filing copies, stamped, dated, and certified by the patent office. My signature sat neatly beside the former CTO's. Tom leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. "Where did you get these?" "I filed them," I said. Silence. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of the CEO's pen tapping against the table. He tried one last time, voice low. "You realize what this could do to the acquisition? You could cost us millions, Mary. Think carefully." "I have," I said quietly. "For years." Then I slid the folder toward him. "You wanted paperwork. Here it is." The room froze. No shouting, no dramatic outbursts. Just 3 people realizing they'd underestimated the wrong woman. Tom finally cleared his throat. "We'll review this," he muttered, collecting the papers with trembling hands. "Please do," I said, standing. "And while you're at it, check the federal database. You'll find my name there too. I left before they could respond." Back at my desk, I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just steady. For years, I'd been the one cleaning up their mistakes, writing the language that saved them from lawsuits, making sure every document was airtight. I had always protected the company, and now the protection ran both ways, whether they liked it or not. By late afternoon, whispers started spreading. People were talking in low voices near the break room. One of the engineers mentioned that the acquisition review had hit a snag. I didn't ask. I just kept typing, updating a report that no one would read. At 6:12 p.m., another email landed in my inbox, this time directly from Trionis Legal. "Ms. Leland, we appreciate your prompt verification earlier today. Could you please confirm your contribution scope for the remaining filings as well? Our audit indicates 54 documents naming you as inventor or co-inventor. No one at Ecliptech had copied me on that thread, which meant Trionis had reached out independently. The buyers had found the truth. And tomorrow, when they sat in that boardroom with the CEO boasting about his streamlined portfolio, they'd have a very different picture of what they were buying. They'd realize the paperwork girl wasn't background noise. She was the backbone. And the backbone was done bending. By the time I reached the office on Wednesday morning, the tension had a smell. Burnt coffee, nerves, and panic disguised as perfume. The Trionis acquisition team was already there, all suits and smooth smiles, setting up in the glass conference room that everyone at Ecliptech now called the stage. I passed the CEO in the hallway. He didn't look at me, just straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked faster. That was my first clue something had cracked. The second came 10 minutes later when legal sent out a vague message about minor delays in documentation review. In corporate language, that's code for something's on fire. I stayed at my desk, close enough to hear the muffled voices upstairs, but far enough to remain invisible. At 9:15, the first email hit. Request for clarification. Inventor listings and ownership structure discrepancies. Filings number 2028 to number 2082. Requesting full documentation. They'd found it. The same folder of filings the CEO had tried to bury under corporate entity revisions. And now Trionis wanted answers. Around 10 a.m., the conference room door opened and Kara from HR appeared at my desk, pale and tight-lipped. "Mary," she said softly, "they need you upstairs." "Now, do they?" I asked. "Yes, please." Her tone wasn't a request. It was resignation. When I walked into that room, the temperature seemed to drop. Around the table sat the CEO, 2 Trionis lawyers, our CFO, and the head of legal. Laptops glowed. Papers were spread out like debris after a storm. The CEO smiled, that thin, strained version of a smile people wear when they've already lost but don't know it yet. "Mary," he said, "thank you for joining us. We just need to clear up a few details for our friends from Trionis, one of the lawyers. A silver-haired woman with calm, surgical eyes gestured for me to sit. We appreciate your time, Miss Leland. There seem to be multiple filings where you are listed as inventor or co-inventor. Could you confirm that's accurate? I nodded. It is. The CEO jumped in. Fast. To clarify, Mary supported documentation efforts. She didn't contribute to the lawyer raised her hand. Mr. Kent, we're aware of your position. What we need to understand is how your company's IP valuation reached $2.4 billion when a single employee appears to have authored most of the underlying patents. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through steel. I could feel everyone's eyes shift toward me. The woman they'd ignored for years, now sitting quietly with the power to tilt the table. The lawyer continued, flipping through the binder. Filings related to adaptive sensor frameworks, firmware compliance logic, data compression algorithms, all list Ms. Leland. That's unusual for someone classified as administrative staff. The CEO tried again. She's being modest about her role. She organized the paperwork. It's a legacy formatting issue. The lawyer didn't even blink. We verified the USPTO records. The signatures are original, timestamps valid, and the inventor acknowledgments filed under oath. That's not formatting. That's authorship. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to defend myself. The documents already had. Finally, the lawyer turned to me. Ms. Leland, were you compensated through any work-for-hire agreement for these filings? I shook my head. No contract. I was a salaried employee at the time, but no separate agreement regarding IP ownership. That was it. The detonator. Trionis' second representative leaned forward, his tone now colder. Then Ecliptech cannot prove ownership. These filings form the core of your valuation. If they don't belong fully to the company, we can't proceed. The CEO's voice cracked. This is insane. She's just admin. The lawyer looked at him steadily. Then you should have read your own contracts. It was quiet after that. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that hums with humiliation. The CFO looked down at his notepad. Legal rubbed his temples. Kara stared at the wall. I spoke only once more. You asked for clarity, I said softly. Now you have it. The CEO looked at me, fury barely hidden behind his eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? I met his stare. Protected the truth. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. The Trionis team gathered their binders and left with curt nods. The CEO stayed seated, unmoving. I walked out, feeling every set of eyes on my back, the same ones that had once looked through me. Back at my desk, I sat down, opened my laptop, and typed a short message to legal. Happy to provide any additional verification needed for federal filings. Please note that all original documentation remains intact and timestamped in compliance archives. Send. By late afternoon, whispers turned into noise. Someone said the deal had been paused for review. Someone else said Trionis was reconsidering the valuation. I didn't need confirmation. I knew what that meant. At 5:32 p.m., an email arrived from the founder, the man who'd once called me the glue. Mary, please meet me in the boardroom at 7. Just you and me. No subject line, no pleasantries. Just a quiet request from someone who finally remembered my name. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Tomorrow, I'd decide whether to rebuild with them or let it all burn. The boardroom was half dark when I arrived that evening. Only one light glowed above the long table, the kind that hums softly like it knows what's coming. The founder sat alone at the far end, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. He looked older than I remembered, older than he should have in his early 50s. The bravado was gone. Mary, he said quietly, gesturing for me to sit. You probably know why you're here. I have a guess, I replied. He gave a weary nod. The deal's frozen. Trionis won't move forward until they verify the ownership on those filings. Legal says your name is on 54 of them. He paused, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You were never supposed to be erased, you know. Things got political. I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands. Political? That's an elegant word for pretending someone doesn't exist. He sighed. Look, I know you've been treated unfairly. But this deal, it's life or death for the company. 200 people could lose their jobs. If there's any way to fix this, I let him talk. The same man who once told me I was the glue now sounded like someone begging the glue not to dry. When he finally stopped, I said, You don't need to fix this. You just need to tell the truth. His eyes flickered. You could sign a release, Mary. Assign your rights to the company retroactively. We'll compensate you. Generously, there it was. The offer. The kind that comes wrapped in guilt and desperation. Compensation. I repeated softly. You mean hush money? He didn't deny it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the boardroom, the office was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people are afraid to be seen leaving. I don't want to ruin anyone's career, I said finally. But I won't lie. I built half the systems this company runs on. I wrote the language that got us through audits, the filings that protect our products. You sold innovation that was mine to people who never bothered to ask who made it. And now, suddenly, it matters. He looked down at the table. You're right. The words surprised me. He said them without defensiveness, without spin, just exhaustion. I let him sideline you, he said. The new CEO. He wanted control. I thought it was strategy. It was ego. We should have done better by you. That's true, I said quietly. But recognition after erasure isn't justice. It's cleanup. He met my eyes. Then what do you want, Mary? That was the question, wasn't it? For years, I'd wanted nothing. No spotlight, no promotion, just respect for doing things right. But now, sitting there with 54 patents tied to my name and a billion-dollar deal on ice, I realized I did want something. Not revenge, not money. Something simpler. I want the record corrected, I said, publicly. I want the filings to stay under my name. I want the truth in the documents you hand to Trionis and in every investor report that follows. No edits, no substitutions. He hesitated. That's fair, but they'll want you to stay, to manage the transition. I'll consider it, I said. Under one condition, that man never steps foot in my department again. He nodded slowly. The CEO's already gone. The board asked for his resignation an hour ago. I blinked, not hiding my surprise. That fast? The buyers wanted a sign we're serious about accountability. He was the sign it was quiet again. Then, almost reluctantly, he smiled. The first real one I'd seen from him in years. You know, they told me Trionis lawyers called you the invisible asset. That's what they wrote in their report. I smiled faintly. I've been called worse. We signed the agreement before midnight. Nothing fancy, just a legal acknowledgement of contribution, ownership, and reinstatement. My title changed from administrative support to Director of Intellectual Property and Compliance. A mouthful, but the right kind of one. The next morning, the internal announcement hit everyone's inboxes at once. I didn't read the comments, but I heard the whispers in the hallway. Some were surprised. Some were embarrassed. A few, maybe, were proud. Trionis resumed due diligence 2 days later. This time, the binder with my name on it stayed closed. Not because it was hidden, but because everything inside it had already been verified. When the deal finally closed, the founder came by my office with a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for saving us from ourselves. And beneath it, a check. Not a fortune, but fair. A token of gratitude that felt earned. I didn't cash it right away. I left it on my desk for weeks, beside the framed printout of one of the first patents I ever filed. Sometimes, when the office got too loud, I'd glance at it and remind myself why I stayed. Not for them, not even for vindication, but because every company, every system, needs someone who still believes that truth, written clearly and signed honestly, is the only thing that lasts. Paper doesn't forget. It doesn't flatter or betray. It just waits. And when the time comes, it speaks louder than any boardroom ever could.